Meet Enma Popli, host of Atalanta Diaries, a podcast celebrating trailblazing women worldwide. From India and all over the world, Enma's international podcasting experience shapes her unique approach. Discover how she turns cultural differences into opportunities, uses coaching skills to create deeper conversations, and maintains passion in her podcasting journey. Welcome to the Podcasting Secrets Show, where successful creators share their best stories, secrets, and strategies. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Hello, incurable creators, and welcome to this episode of Podcasting Secrets. Today, I'm joined by Enma Popli. Enma is the host of the Atalanta Diaries show, where she features pioneering women from diverse fields and regions, where they share stories of resilience and success. Every Friday on her show and on various social media platforms. She has a really cool global reach that we're going to talk about today, about helping your podcast to expand a little more globally. She also cares a lot about giving back, and her podcast is a passion podcast, and we're going to talk about that too. Also, Enma runs a coaching practice, and we're going to talk about how a podcast can help someone with a coaching practice and how a coaching practice can help someone with a podcast, and vice versa. So thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Enma.
Thank you. Thank you, Nathan, for inviting me. And the last thing I expected was that I'll end up talking about how can a podcast become successful, because it's something which I also learned over the years or over the months. And I'm excited because this is the second time I've been invited to share my podcasting secrets, and I'm more than happy to do that. It completely aligns with my wise story. Yeah.
Okay, so Enma, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your podcasting journey?
So, born and brought up in India, in a beautiful city called Chandigarh. Completed my master's, my MBA in Chandigarh, and then I think I metaphorically flew the nest. Very privileged that I've lived in many different geographies. You know, my husband and I started our journey in Southeast Asia, then we lived in India, and now in the US for almost more than 5 years. Have donned many hats. I've been an entrepreneur, an HR leader, coach, and now a podcaster. Something I'm passionate about my podcast now, and very passionate about my coaching journey, because it allows me to see the impact I'm making, and that's what keeps me going and staying committed to my why story.
So that name, Atalanta Diaries, the name of your show, what does that mean, or how did you come to pick that as the name of your show?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a name which I've had some naysayers in the journey, but I didn't give up on. The name was suggested by a very dear friend, Amit, and I'm putting it out there. And I wanted to have something intentional. I wanted to have something positive. I wanted to have something which conveys, the tribe of the women I'm going to have conversations with. Atalanta is actually a myth Greek goddess who was born to an Akkadian king, and he abandoned her because she was a girl child. And she went on to becoming a huntress, and obviously shattered all ceilings. And pretty much like all my Atalantas who come from all walks of life, all geographies, who are trailblazers in their own right, and they symbolize Atalanta born to the Akkadian king.
How do you feel that gives meaning to your show? How does that name particular significance with what you're trying to do there on your show?
So like I said earlier, I coach women leaders. I'm a woman myself. As an entrepreneur, I've had an all-women's team. I believe that women need more role models. I believe that women need more inspiration. And I'm hoping that Atalanta Diaries is going to become that platform or that source of inspiration for women from all over the globe. And it truly has become like that. It started with a project where I thought, I'll bring these perspectives to other women. And very quickly, I understood that my why had evolved a lot. I think it has also become about celebrating other women's stories. When I started chatting with, or rather having conversations with all my Atalantas, a lot of times they would say that we've never shared the story with anybody. They would even get overwhelmed. And there were some of them made comments like, this almost feels like a therapy session, that we've never really had an opportunity to take a step back and share our journey with anybody. So I think, that's what I'm hoping, that through Atalanta Diaries, I'm able to create more Atalantas and inspire younger women from all geographies to find their North Star.
You talked about this being a passion project. In what way is your show a passion project for you?
That's a great question. I think it's the reason why I call it a passion project is that it has nothing to do with my coaching practice. Yes, I'm able to use my coaching skills to unpack a lot with my guests. Yes, I'm able to stay committed to my why story. But otherwise, I just trust the process. I just, stay committed to it. I'm just super passionate about it every day, morning, evening, and night. I'm only thinking about it. And it just keeps me going, So it's not like I am working out of, or rather, it's not like I'm doing the podcast out of any kind of stress. It's just purely from ease and flow and just having fun with it. And that's why, and I think that's only possible if you're doing something out of passion.
So how has having a passion podcast affected you? Does it, for example, make you a lot more willing to invest the time that it takes? Does it give you a lot more meaning in your life? What are the benefits that come to you from having a passion podcast?
All of the above, Nathan. The biggest thing about the podcast is when I see the impact of the podcast, and I'm sort of happy to share maybe if you want some impact stories around it, and that's what keeps me going. There are times when, you feel a little bit, there's lulls. There are times when you're like, oh my God, this is getting a little bit exhausting. And the very next day, universe has its way of sending me some impact stories, and that just keeps me going. And that's what in my mind is, being driven by passion. I mean, yeah. And if you want, I can share my impact stories with you.
Yeah, please do. That'd be great.
Stories like getting messages on the side from my listeners saying, today I listened to Nandini and now I recognize how my sports can be, a great skill which I acquired in my leadership journey, from this young girl who happens to be my niece and literally calls me up and asks me, how can I become an Atalanta Diaries? And, through a coach-like conversation, she came to the conclusion that at 10, she's going to become an author. And believe it or not, she, in less than 3 months, put together her own book. And she and I together launched that book amongst friends and family. And she was on a complete roll, took her own decisions, printed the book, typed the book on her father's computer, and put it all together just because, she was inspired by Atalanta Diaries. So that's like my most favorite and most powerful story of the youngest Atalanta, in the making. We've also used the conversation at Atalanta Diaries in so many platforms. Book clubs have called me up and said, instead of a book club, we're thinking of doing a podcast club. So they've, have conversations. They've had conversations around, the Atlantas of Atalanta Diaries. Certain workshops and leadership programs have used these conversations to talk about leadership and nuances of leadership. So I think all those stories are not cannot be measured by number of listeners, but measured by true impact that the podcast is making.
Let's talk about the global reach of your podcast for a minute. So talk to me a little bit about what you've learned running a global podcast. What have you had to do differently, maybe with languages or cultures or time zones? What secrets and tips can you give to someone who's trying to run a more of a global reach in their podcast?
That's a great question. And maybe here I'll sort of, relate it back to my journey, right? So as an entrepreneur and as a corporate trainer, I've done a lot of work in the space of culture, right? I did a lot of workshops with even clients like Microsoft, where I helped them consultants understand the importance of cultural sensitivity. I've done a lot of work in the area of gravitas. I've done a lot of work in the area of international etiquette, international, business, and so on. So I think this is the time where it's all culminated into the podcast. It allowed me to use all these experiences to actually very comfortably have conversations with my guests in Atalanta Diaries. That's one perspective. The other perspective is, again, and it takes me back to my purpose, right? So because I personally love meeting and conversing and chatting with all these women, time zone doesn't bother me. I recognize and I understand that I have to make that adjustment, be first flexible. So I give my Atalantas, my guests, the freedom to choose a time. So I've had guests from Brunei, I've had guests from Europe. I've had guests from Asia, from Far East, and from the US and India. So pretty much like my coaching practice, even my podcast, I have been very flexible in adjusting to different time zones.
So time zones is one issue. How about cultural issues? How do you bridge cultural gaps across multiple countries?
So from a perspective of podcast or the perspective of coach?
Either way.
Right. So like I said, first recognizing and understanding that there are different cultures. That's the first step. Second, being humble to different cultures. And third, being sensitive to different cultures. So I absolutely recognize and I understand that everybody comes from a different culture. So learn about it, read about it, be humble about it. And then I think the minute you show humility, you're able to interact and adjust with any culture.
Today's episode of Podcasting Secrets is sponsored by PodUp, the ultimate podcasting platform. As podcasters, we're always looking for ways to simplify our workflows, grow our reach, and make more money. What if I told you that there's a tool that combines more than 35 essential podcasting features into one platform? That's exactly what PodUp offers, and it's transforming how we create, grow, monetize, publish, syndicate, and do so many other things with our podcasting content. From recording and editing to website building and audience engagement, PodUp covers virtually the entire podcasting process. What sets PodUp apart is its focus on growth and monetization. The platform includes AI-powered features that help you save time on tasks like creating short video clips and transcribing episodes. It also offers tools for guest management, content syndication, and email list building, all accessible from one centralized dashboard. For those of you looking to turn your podcast into a revenue stream, PodUp provides integrated monetization tools to help you market products, courses, and services directly to your audience. What's even better is that with PodUp, you don't have to waste time and money switching between multiple softwares to produce your podcast. With PodUp, you get all 35 modules within one fully integrated platform and for a fraction of the cost. If you're interested in simplifying your podcast workflow while expanding your reach and making some money while you're at it, check out podup.com. That's PODUP.com and get a free trial of the software. Now, back to the show. So what are some of the greatest benefits that you've received as a coach from running a podcast?
So one, of course, so I'll give you two perspectives to this, okay? One, of course, is how have I used my coaching experience in the podcast? So that's the first part. And then, of course, I'll talk about incidental benefits. So I think I've been able to unpack a lot in my conversations. It started, of course, it was like I said early on, it was way out of my comfort zone. And early on, I would, tend to follow a script, ask certain questions, which I had jotted down and watch the clock thinking that I have to finish it in 45 minutes. But as time progressed, maybe just within 10 or 12 episodes, I understand. I have a lot of mentors, by the way, and my two young sons are my biggest mentors who really, wrapped me in the knuckles and kept on giving me feedback. Like, you cannot be yourself, be your authentic self, just be natural, and so on and so forth. So very quickly, I started enjoying the process. Very quickly, I really donned my coaching hat and then just trusted the process. So I did not watch the clock. I did not watch the script. I just, what we call in coaching, I just danced with the client. Like, I just enjoyed the journey, went, with like a fascinated anthropologist, I call it, completely explored in the conversation and just enjoyed the conversation with my client. I think that's what allowed me to, if I say it myself, unpack with my client. How has it benefited me? Sometimes my clients have even ended the conversation by saying, I have reflected a lot and you've given me things to do after this podcast conversation. So obviously, even if it's a CEO or it's, or somebody in the C-suite, they've also felt like it was a sort of coaching conversation. And then as a result of that, you do get calls back from your client or from your guest on how can we take this conversation further into the organization and how can you offer your coaching to my other team members.
Yeah, that's really powerful. As you invite someone on your show, you give them value, you give them a platform to share their voice, you let them promote what they're wanting to promote. and they get to know you, like you, and trust you, they're a lot more open probably to exploring using your services. So a lot of companies are doing that, where they are doing a show and inviting their potential customers as the guests on the show. And then some of those guests end up turning into clients.
I think this is where it's a passion project. Like, it's truly, when I speak to the clients, I don't speak to them within keeping in mind that I'm going to make them my potential clients.
That's
I
right.
think I'm very
That's right. Goal is to just do good and provide good value out there. And if they turn into a client, great. And if not, it's okay. What's one of the greatest challenges that you faced in your podcasting journey, and how did you overcome it?
So a lot of people had, sort of warned me, or rather, not really warned is not the right word, but sort of told me to keep in mind. Like, before I started the podcast, and because I wasn't a podcaster myself, I did a lot of homework. I met a lot of people in the podcasting industry, just friends, family, coaches, and so on and so forth, just to, learn and be sure of what I was getting into. I still remember another coach, and is a very dear friend, Rajiv, told me there will be times when you'll feel low, and like it can get exhausting. And that time I wasn't very sure of what he's saying, but I totally understand that, and it can get very, very exhausting. And because I recognize as a passion project, I don't allow that to bother me. So I allow myself those breaks. I allow myself time to reflect. I allow myself time to re-huddle with my team, and my advisors on how can I make it better? How can I make it different? How can I evolve? So that's one challenge where I recognize that, exhaustion just happens. It does happen. And there will be a lull, and recognize it and address it. So that's one. And two, of course, I'm not a professional podcaster, and I recognize that marketing anything is a challenge. So if I start, quantifying my listeners in sheer numbers, I'm going to get very disappointed, because I'm not doing anything about trying to build those numbers. It's just growing very organically. So that's probably, in a sense, a challenge. And it's, coming from a place of, now that the podcast is showcasing such amazing stories, I almost feel like it's incumbent upon me to, bring those stories front and center. And that's why I sometimes feel, the sense of urgency that I need to share this with more people. And that's where I struggle.
Going back to that global question we were talking about, how is the Indian podcasting market different than the US podcasting market? And what advice do you have for us for doing a good job in the India market for other people wanting to go to India?
I think, for one, probably I would have not even started the podcast if I was living in India, because I think the awareness about podcasting in India is still very nascent. It's in my mind, it's people are not that aware of it. That's one. Two, I think in India, it's not a habit yet. I think people probably relate more to content on the YouTube, a video content, a video reel, and so on and so forth. So often I get messages from people saying, "Oh, I loved your reels." I've realized that they see the video and they think the podcast is done. So that's probably the biggest difference. Whereas in the US, because people are driving on their own, it's a great resource to learn, a great resource to entertain yourself, and so on and so forth. Remember, in India, people are spoiled. They have people driving their cars for them. It allows them to do many other things. And I personally feel that, therefore, podcasting is not that popular yet.
So understanding it's still a developing market, which may present some good opportunities as well for people to focus on that market and be one of the first in that space that maybe isn't quite as saturated as some of the other countries. What are the three most important secrets that you learned that could help other podcasters?
I know I've said it so many times, but I just can't help saying it again. I think being committed and passionate about your purpose, to me, that's really the start and end of it. Like, to me, whenever I feel tired, exhausted, I just remember the impact I'm making through the podcast. And I just keep going back to my why. Second is, of course, recognize that there will be fatigue and address it, like I said, and take those, breaks which you deserve. That's the second. And yes, and evolve. I think every 6 months when I take that season break, I take a step back and I speak to my advisors, speak to my mentors, speak to my coach, and we sort of decide what can we do differently this time, whether it's a new intro or it's getting rid of the intro or it's cutting the time down or it's, more is not necessarily better, So I think those are the three things which are, in my mind, the secrets of making Atalanta Diaries what it is.
You talk about focusing on the why and not the what or the how. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Again, the purpose, to me, maybe if I can just share my own story, right? So maybe I should call out and give credit to Simon Sinek for that. So many, many years back, my husband shared the golden circle with me. And I think that's the time I was planning as an entrepreneur. I was sort of reflecting on what's my why, or more like, what do I want to do? What's my strategy? And I still remember, on a lighter note, I would always tell him, no, but I need to make more money. And then he showed me the golden circle and he said, money is not your why. And when I really, reflected on the golden circle, that's the day I was so clear that my why is about helping other people become better versions of themselves, and enabling other people to succeed. Yeah.
That's inspiring.
Thank you. And I think ever since I had complete clarity on that why, whatever I do, if it aligns with my why story, it's part of my journey.
Enma, if our audience enjoyed this episode like I did and they want to learn more about you and your products and services, what are the best ways for them to do that?
So I have a LinkedIn profile. We also have an Atalanta Diaries LinkedIn page. I have recently updated my website, and I'm very proud of it because it gave me a chance to reflect on my journey and my adventures, because that's what's made me what it has. So my website is www.enmapopli.com. In the website, even all the episodes have been filtered, or rather we've created categories so you can, listen to the podcast based on the genre. I also have Twitter presence in Twitter. I also have an Instagram page. That's something which I have created as a goal for myself because I'm very bad at Instagram. So I'm trying to make that better because the millennials and the Gen Zs and, probably understand that better. Yeah, I think that's how you can reach out to me. Do follow my podcast on Spotify or it's there on all platforms.
Well, thank you so much, Enma, for the value that you added and for being a guest on the show today.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed having a chat with you.
And here are my key takeaways from this episode. Number 1, Enma Popli hosts Atalanta Diaries, featuring pioneering women from diverse fields and regions. Number 2, the podcast name is inspired by Atalanta, a Greek goddess who shattered all ceilings. Number 3, Enma's global background helps her navigate cultural sensitivities in podcasting. Number 4, she emphasizes flexibility in dealing with time zones for a global podcast. Number 5, Enma uses her coaching skills to create deeper, more meaningful conversations with guests. Number 6, the podcast is treated as a passion project, which helps maintain commitment and enthusiasm. Number 7, understanding target markets is crucial. Podcasting habits differ between countries like India and the United States. Number 8, Enma focuses on the why behind her podcast, inspired by Simon Sinek's Golden Circle concept. Number 9, the podcast has evolved from sharing perspectives to celebrating women's stories. And finally, number 10, Enma advises addressing fatigue and regularly evolving the podcast format to maintain quality. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I wish you success in your podcast. And if you're looking for a great podcasting platform, I recommend you check out PodUp. It has more than 50 integrated tools available with one username and password, integrated together for all one low price. And you can get a free trial at podup.com.